Dive right into this explainer and unpack the most famous and definitely the most infamous book on politics ever written. I mean, if you've ever heard someone's behavior described as Machiavellian, you know for a fact it's not a compliment, right? But where does that dark reputation actually come from? Well, today we're going to look closely at the foundational text that literally upended our entire understanding of power, morality, and justice.
We're talking about Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, and specifically, we'll be pulling some brilliant insights from translator Harvey C. Mansfield's introduction to the work. Now, this book was originally written for Lorenzo de' Medici. You can basically think of him as the ultra-busy, high-level CEO of the 16th century. Because his target audience was a guy constantly in the trenches of active politics with zero time for abstract philosophy, Machiavelli designed this guide to be brief, punchy, and incredibly practical.
Okay, we have to start with the shock value here. The sheer infamy of Machiavelli comes from his startling premise that in the brutal realm of power, you can absolutely get away with murder, literally. He argues that if you win, your criminal actions aren't punished by some divine lightning bolt or the degradation of your soul. Actually, if your ruthless actions secure the state, you won't be blamed at all. You'll be praised. It's wild, but he points out that the criminals who go down in history as infamous monsters only carry that label because they made the mistake of losing.
Section 1, the most infamous book. Let's look at exactly how this text created a massive paradigm shift in how we view power.
The absolute core identity of The Prince is the idea that politics exists purely for its own sake. Before Machiavelli came along, politics was always debated in the context of things above it, things like natural law, divine justice, or ultimate human goodness. Well, Machiavelli just took a pair of scissors and snipped that link. He established this terrifying yet oddly compelling idea that politics has its own internal playbook, and it should never, ever accept limitations from morality or religion when the sole objective is just to win.
Section 2. Excuses for Machiavelli. Over the centuries, people have felt deeply uncomfortable with this level of ruthless pragmatism. Because of that discomfort, there's basically a whole cottage industry of academics trying to soften his image. People just can't stomach the idea that he was an apologist for tyranny, so they make excuses. They'll claim, oh, he was secretly a Republican who loved the people, or they point to his last chapter and say he was just a passionate Italian patriot trying to kick out the barbarians. Or, my personal favorite, they argue he was just a forerunner of modern political science, just a totally objective guy neutrally reporting the facts without judging them, right?
But as Harvey C. Mansfield brilliantly points out in his introduction, these excuses actually make Machiavelli way less interesting. More importantly, they totally blind us to his fundamental assault on traditional morality. By trying to cram him into our comfortable, modern boxes of democracy or science, we completely miss the radical, dangerous nature of what he was actually trying to teach us.
Section 3. The effectual truth. To really grasp his endgame, we need to dig into this specific concept. This is where we see a huge, stark contrast. Think about the classical tradition. Guys like Plato with his Republic, or St. Augustine's City of God. They spent their time building these imagined, pristine worlds where morality simply means doing the right thing for the pure love of goodness. But Machiavelli, he introduces the effectual truth. He flat out denies that these imaginary, perfect republics exist anywhere in the real world. Instead, he argues the only rules that actually matter are the ones made by powerful people acting under strict necessity.
In fact, he boldly declares in chapter 15 that it's far better to go directly to the effectual truth of a thing than to just imagine it. He gives a massive warning. If you ignore what is actually done in the messy real world and focus only on what should be done according to some perfect moral code, you are on a one-way trip to ruin.
Section 4. Learning not to be good. This brings us to the absolute most chilling yet undeniably practical piece of advice he gives to any aspiring leader.
Listen carefully to his specific phrasing here. He doesn't just say a prince should go out and be evil. No, he says a prince must actively learn to be able not to be good. Goodness is a habit we're all taught by society and religion, right? But a real leader has to cultivate the iron discipline to put that goodness in a box and either use it or ignore it based entirely on what the moment demands.
He completely tears down classical morality with a brutally simple piece of logic. A person who insists on making a profession of good in every single situation is going to get destroyed among so many people who are not good. Playing by the rules of perfect morality is basically a death sentence when your opponents are playing to win at any cost. You have to adapt to the players actually on the board, not the ones you wish were there.
Section 5. The problem of acquisition. Let's shift gears and see how this mindset shapes Machiavelli's rather dark view of human society.
The key concept here is acquisition. Now that's just Machiavelli's polite, almost businesslike term for conquest. And to him, conquest is the actual engine of human history. Older philosophers love to classify governments by their high-minded ideals or legal structures, but Machiavelli classifies them simply by how they were acquired. For him, the reality of conquest completely overrides any sweet ideas we have about natural inherent justice.
Mansfield uses this truly fascinating analogy to explain acquisition versus inheritance. Imagine you inherit a house in a long, beautiful row of comfortably built houses. You might add your own extension to the end of that row, and because you inherited that starting point, your success feels totally just, legal, and normal. But if you walk all the way back down the street to the very first house, you realize it was built from scratch. No existing support, no easy inheritance.
What this means is that every single inheritance, every comfortable, civilized society presupposes an original acquisition that was made without a previous inheritance. At the very dawn of any orderly society, there had to be an original conquest. And in that chaotic first moment of taking power and land, the polite, civilized niceties of justice, they just weren't an option.
The hard truth is that behind the curtain of any just society are historical realities of sheer, brutal necessity. The source material points out that the foundation of modern states often involves harsh historical events, like the British being expelled, Native Americans being defrauded, and black people being enslaved. Machiavelli's core, uncomfortable argument is that underneath the polite laws of our comfortable world lies a bedrock of force and actions that completely contradict our modern ideas of justice.
Because, as he notes, if a prince wins and actually manages to hold on to a state, the masses are always going to judge his methods as honorable, no matter how much brutality was used on day one. Reputation isn't some reflection of your soul's true goodness. Reputation is just outward conformity to successful human force. Basically, people respect the winner, and they'll eagerly rewrite the moral rulebook to justify the winner's success.
Section 6. The grave issue. This brings us to the ultimate, profound dilemma at the heart of this entire explainer. I really want to leave you chewing on this provocative thought. It's the grave issue that makes the prince just as dangerous and just as essential today as it was in the 1500s. Ask yourself, are the moral rules we follow actually real, dictated by nature or some higher power? Or are they merely the convenient manufactured tools of those who have successfully conquered, designed just to keep their winnings safe? It is a deeply chilling question, but coming to terms with Machiavelli's effectual truth forces us to look at the world exactly as it is, not as we wish it to be.